Welcome back to week 6 recordings for Soc 101, Introduction to Sociology. This week we're looking at gender. In the second recording, we looked at the social construction of sex and gender. Oh, and I think I didn't answer the quiz question. So the third quiz question, I'm going to answer it right now. The question asks, which is true? Is sex socially constructed? Is gender socially constructed? Or are sex and gender both socially constructed? And the answer is both sex and gender are socially constructed. Okay, so we are our next recording, this one, go and grab your lecture quizzes. We will be talking about gender inequality, and we will talk about theoretical approaches to gender inequality. So, okay, so first we have gender stratification. So remember last week we talked about social stratification and the layers. So social stratification categorized people into a hierarchy based on relative wealth, power, and prestige. Gender stratification is a relatively simple system of hierarchy with less complexity. Because most societies have constructed a binary sex system, there are often only 2 layers to gender stratification. In our current culture, we have more than 2 layers, but generally gender stratification has males being on top with the most access to resources and power. And next would come females, and after that comes trans people, gender fluid people, and gender nonconforming. So let's see. So when we talk about gender inequality, we ask, why is there gender inequality? And this can be explained through theories and ideologies. So gender inequality is considered, another way to call it is patriarchy, which is a nearly universal system involving subordination of femininity to masculinity. I'm not going to talk about Gail Rubin here, but you can read about her in your textbook and see her on this slide if you come back to it. So when we talk about theoretical approaches to gender studies, we have 2 very broad approaches, 2 main ways to think about gender in sociology. There's the gender roles approach, which is how the nuclear family is considered the basis of social order in society. Men fulfill the instrumental role, the breadwinner role, and women fill the expressive role or the domestic role. These 2 work together in lockstep to help maintain the social order. And the social order is maintained because each has their own function. Separate gender roles were seen under the gender roles approach to bring stability to families and to the society at large. So obviously this is a very old-fashioned approach to looking at gender in sociology, and it has a lot of critics. One criticism is, what about family differences? What about differences in social class? What about differences in gender? The other approach is called the gender institutions approach. This looks at how gender is embodied in various institutions in society. Remember, gender is socially constructed. It's a set of normative roles. with the gendered institution approach, we look at how these normative roles provide the basis for different positions of advantage and disadvantage in social institutions, such as families, schools, church, and the workplace. So in other words, if, where's my list here? So if we have this list, if gender is constructed like this, how does that lead to inequality in social institutions, such as school or the workplace? That's the gendered institutions approach. Some other theoretical perspectives are, for instance, structural functionalism. Under the structural functionalist approach, gender stratification and differentiation contribute to accomplishing critical tasks. It's seen as a functional necessity for the smooth functioning of society. So, gender inequality is seen as a functional necessity, so it's not seen as a negative. It's seen as something that's needed. You can see that that's like the gender roles approach, right? That this inequality is needed so that the women can stay at home. Otherwise, this might disrupt the social order as it is. So in pre-industrial societies, the necessary roles were clear to see. In hunter-gatherer societies, women did the foraging and kept close to home to tend to children, and while pregnant, and men did the hunting. In agrarian societies, men tend to soil and do planting, and women tend to flocks and harvest crops. In industrial societies, this is no longer necessary. We don't have to have these different roles, but according to the functionalist perspective, there are still gender-specific roles that help to maintain the social order. Psychoanalytic theories come from the approach that males and females develop personality structures based on same gender socialization. And I'm going to leave that one there as it is. And then lastly, conflict theory argues that patriarchal capitalists benefit through systems that subordinate women. So a whole series of sociological theories came out of conflict theories about gender inequality, and we call these theories feminist theories. And then lastly is social constructionist theories. These claim that women's subordination is a cultural byproduct and is developed through social interaction. These theorists question the whole notion of men and women as separate, stable categories and question the value and appropriateness of Western scholars applying their cultural logic to the study of non-Western societies. So from the social constructionist perspective, we look at how these categories, these gender categories, how they are defined and why they are defined that way. And then we take seriously the consideration that maybe the way that we construct these categories is different than how they are constructed in other societies. And so maybe our constructions of gender don't really fit. So all theories have ideologies behind them, and all inequalities also have ideologies behind them. So the ideology or worldview that pertains to gender inequality is called sexism. And sexism is is ideologies that are used to rationalize unequal treatment between men and women. Sexism uses the belief that women and men are innately different and that those innate differences translate into female inferiority. So, people who come from a sexist ideology believe that women are biologically and innately inferior to men. And so they believe that females are worse than men, are inferior. And so our biology is our destiny. It's either going to put us on the top or on the bottom. Some sexist stereotypes are the basis of sexist ideology. So each gender is assumed to carry certain innate characteristics. For instance, you guys wrote about this in your discussion board for socialization. So the men in the Disney films were seen to be strong, protectors, decisive, powerful, less sensitive, and the females were seen to be ruled by their emotions, less intelligent, more sensitive, more worried about how they look, and these are seen as inferior qualities. And under the sexist stereotypes, these supposedly innate characteristics are seen to lead to naturally gendered social roles. So these are sexist stereotypes. From the social constructionist perspective, we believe in sociology that these characteristics are socially constructed and have been developed through social interaction. I only have like 4 more minutes left, so I'm going to talk about gender in the workplace briefly. So let's see. So since the 1970s, I'm about to answer a quiz question. It's actually the last one. Since the 1970s, 37 million more women have entered the workforce, and we are nearing equal numbers with men in the workforce. But does patriarchy still exist? Can we connect our current status of women to the patriarchal systems from before? So the answer to your to that quiz question, the very last one, is that 37 million more women are in the workforce since the 1970s. So it was the last option. One of the ways that we can see inequality in the workforce is in what's called the second shift. And I'll let you look the rest of them up because I don't have much more time left. But the sociologist Arlie Hochschild came up with this term, the second shift. She did a study based on statistics collected by the U.S. Department of Labor. And what she found was that she wanted to look at who works around the house, basically, who contributes around the house in households where there are 2 working parents, 2 working opposite gender parents. So what she found was that in households with children with 2 opposite gender parents who are both working, that not only had the woman entered the workforce, but she was also still doing all of the unpaid labor tasks at home once she got home from work. And this was called the second shift. You can see why. It's like her second shift. So since women started entering the workforce in the 1970s, men have begun to help out more than before, but there is still a very large gap. Currently, men spend about 16 hours per week on chores and work around the house, including childcare, while women spend about 30 hours on average per week. And this is women who are working full-time jobs. So they work a full-time job and then come home and work 30 hours a week on childcare and household chores. So the answer to the 4th quiz question is the first one, 16 and 30. So fathers are helping out more and more with chores currently. Men spend about 16 hours per week on household chores, and women spend about 30. All right, that's all I have time for. I have so much more to say, but I guess you'll get the rest from your book. So, all right, good luck. See you later.